office.
No. Really?
That'll tell you.
20 years of being a children's librarian, and I don't need the microphone, but so that I can give it a test run before our guests come and speak to you this evening, I will use the microphone. For over 25 years, the Dover Free Library has been offering this dessert social fundraiser to the community, and we are happy to be able to get to do that again this year. Thank you so much. It's a great night to be out and to be together. And just a couple of quick business announcements before we get to the featured speakers for tonight. I am Tamara, and I'm children's librarian. Budil is our circulation desk librarian. Miles is our summer clerk for this summer. We're so thankful. You did a really nice job. Right up there. And you know John Forrest is the director of the library. And our trustees are here with us this evening too. If the trustees would just raise their hands. These are your elected officials who help take care of the library. They support us in the community, and they just do a really great job representing the library for you and helping to keep it going. Also, I wanted to thank this evening and recognize the many volunteers who help us make this happen. So if you have volunteered in any way for today's dessert social, would you just please raise your hand? We just want to say thank you so very much. And then lastly, of course, tonight after the presentation, you will be enjoying some great desserts that were donated to the fundraiser by various local businesses and individual bakers. And you will be able to see individually their names on the little card in front of their dessert. So keep in mind, if you enjoyed any of those desserts this evening and you happen to drive by one of those businesses, you can always pull in and ask for seconds. All right. So, but they probably won't give it to you for free. I'm just letting you know that right now. They cannot outdo the Dover Library. All right. So if you every year we do have a certain amount of money that we are required by the town to raise in support of the library. So we are working our way towards meeting that goal each year. This is a big part of that. So if you haven't had a chance yet to give to the Dover Library at this event, please consider doing so. You can get the donation box. It's going to go around. There we go. Our friendly chairperson of the trustees is holding it up so you won't miss it. Okay. All right. Without further ado, I forgot something. Following the presentation, you'll have an opportunity to purchase a book. One of the books from our featured speaker, author and speaker for this evening, right over here at the book table. We take checks and cash. Am I right? Yes. And gold. And what? Gold bars. Diamonds. No zucchini. No zucchini. Please, no zucchini. All right. Let's see, did I miss anything now? No. That's it. All right. So, without further ado, Frank Bass is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter whose career has focused on the intersection of government, politics, and business. He is a pioneer in data-driven investigations with almost 3 decades of multimedia experience and innovations at top journalism organizations, including the Wall Street Journal, the Associated Press, Bloomberg News, and Al Jazeera International. Mr. Bass has lectured extensively on 4 continents and is the author of 3 books about using data for journalism. He is here this evening to kindly introduce our featured speaker. Thank you very much.
Okay, the mention of zucchini triggered something here. I checked the weather forecast, and the good news is we're going to have sunny weather on Sunday. The bad news is that's Sunday, August 12th. Hope everyone's tomatoes are wilt-free. So we're here to support this incredibly magnificent institution, the Dover Free Library, and eat cake. We're going to talk about journalism, present and future, and we're going to eat pie. And we're going to talk about the future of American democracy, and I'm going to eat cookies. So thank you all for coming out on this day. I've spent more than 30 years in investigative journalism, and I can tell you that this is a time where a lot of journalists are frankly very afraid. You would think we're afraid because of what happened in Annapolis, or because somebody thinks it's fun to whip up a crowd of yahoos and incite violence against journalists. Not necessarily the case. I mean, I've been chased by bad guys with guns on 4 continents. I've had the Alabama State Patrol check my car for bombs on a regular basis. When George Wallace is worried about your safety, you know there's a problem. I've gotten death threats in 3 languages and in probably about 18 different colors of crayon. But it's a very frightening time because what I think most journalists are frightened of is the future of our democracy and this idea that people are entitled not to their own opinions but to their own facts. So hopefully Leah is going to talk about that tonight. Our speaker, Leah Goodman, is an absolute master of investigative journalism. If you haven't read her book, I recommend it highly. I was telling her it took a strong stomach to get through it, but I think the publication date was 2011. It's The Asylum, The Renegades Who Hijacked the Oil Market, nominated for Financial Times and Goldman Sachs Book of the Year. I suspect that Goldman didn't nominate it because it was terribly flattering to them, but she really digs into the reason why in the 2008-2009 we were looking at oil prices that were at $147 a barrel and paying $4 a gallon for gas. It's one of the really untold stories of the American economy. She followed that up by being banned from the United Kingdom, and I can tell you, you're really not somebody in journalism until you've been tossed out of the country. It's not fun, but you can brag about it for a very long time, and I hope she's still bragging about it. Her high crime, according to Her Majesty's government, was looking at a horrific incidence of child abuse on the island of Jersey off the French coast. And the Brits decided that that was not a good thing, so they detained her for several hours and then sent her packing. It took her, I think, a year before you could get back to the UK. And that's a friendly country. And I believe you're working on a book right now on that subject, which I'll look forward to. And I'm also going to throw out there, in 2014, she wrote a really epic story about the inventor of an absolutely idiotic idea. Having raised 3 teenagers, I'm an expert on idiotic ideas. But it was called Bitcoin, and she tracked the inventor, Satoshi Nakamoto, down and was the first to say, here's this guy who's giving us this thing that is probably just not going to end well for anybody. Leah's written for just about every major financial publication you can name: Wall Street Journal, Barron's, Financial Times. If it's a credible business outlet, she's done good work for it. She's been a writer at large for Institutional Investor, a visiting faculty member at the Center for Environmental Journalism at the University of Colorado at Boulder, and she finds time to contribute to the Commons in Brattleboro. So go local. And I hope you'll listen carefully to what she has to say, because she's very well respected in this field and knows what she's talking about.
That was sort of an intimidating introduction. I'm just going to get situated. I'm really happy you were able to fit my name on the banner, by the way, because it looks like it almost didn't fit. And I've been wanting forever to have a shorter name, and it just hasn't happened yet, so thank you, Miles. Thank you, John Flores, for inviting me here. It's been really great getting to know you in the process of also getting to know the Dover Free Library. And if any of you believe that Amazon shouldn't take over local libraries and that information should be free, I hope you give today. If you really like the talk, I hope you give a lot. Please give either way. I am always a little wary of doing book talks, because when I was in Colorado and my paperback was first coming out, I gave a talk at the Boulder Bookstore, which is a somewhat well-known bookstore for writers, and it gets a lot of wonderful people who come to the talks. And when I was there, the lady told me, you know, the last person who gave a talk here had someone on the Pulitzer Committee who came, and they heard the talk, and that person got the Pulitzer Prize. And I thought, oh, this is great, you know? So at the end of the talk, I went downstairs, after the questions and the full talk, I went downstairs, I was walking out the door, and a man in a suit came up to me and said, "Are you Leah McGrath Goodman?" And I said, "Yeah." You know? And he said, "You're served," and handed me my first lawsuit from an oil trader in this book. We settled, we did matching donations to Save the Children. I'm very proud of that. That was nice. I also wasn't aware we had a Pulitzer Prize winner introducing me. That would have been really great to know. It's a little upsetting. Thank you very much, and I liked the t-shirt, Enemy of the People. Ivanka Trump today said that she does not think the press is the enemy of the people, which made me very happy, and then I felt bad that I felt happy about that.
Can't hear in the back.
Oh, can't?
No.
Miles? Can you check it out? All right? Better?
Yes.
I just need to show it, I guess. So I'm here, I really was just going to talk about the book, but as time went on, and I thought more about what's happening in our country when it comes to talking about the news, talking about facts, and trying to figure out how what happens on Monday doesn't turn into soup by Thursday. Journalists have long been, regardless of who they work for or where they work, been very good at generally agreeing to a basic set of facts, and then we're writing stories based on that sort of cement-like foundation. And usually we don't go back and argue over things that everyone saw on tape or that we discussed or saw that happened earlier that week. But now we are seeing a lot of that. We're seeing a lot of things are happening on Monday, and everyone's debating if we should have gotten a different impression from it just a couple days later. And I think a lot of journalists are frightened by that. So I wanted to walk a little bit through what has worked for me. Hopefully it's illuminating for some of you. And if any of you have questions or comments, I'm really happy to hear what you think, or if there's certain things in the news that have caused you confusion, as we've been getting a much faster news cycle, but also a much more confusing one. So this is our journalist necessary. I think some people don't think so right now. And let me see if this is going to work. There we go. So this is me testifying in Washington with a bunch of other journalists. We were all trying to file Freedom of Information Act requests, and we frequently were ignored. The government in general isn't always good about providing even information we're entitled to. So first rule is our job is to work diligently to discern the facts of the matter and then report on it as fairly and ethically as we can. And frequently we are blocked from getting facts, but we have to keep trying. This is us trying to do that here, and I actually found during this process it was very difficult getting some of my counterparts from the Times and the Washington Post on this dais, because they said they were worried about retaliation, that if they testified before a government committee that their requests weren't being granted, that then more requests would be granted. So that's not necessarily a good situation, and I want people to know that as much as we might be doubtful about the job some journalists are doing, many of us are trying very hard to get facts every day. So just a couple of quickie things. It's very hard to prove something absolutely, and we do try to challenge and question though, and we also try to confirm or falsify throughout our work, because often when you're on the front lines of news and you're writing that first draft of history, you're frequently unclear on what you just saw. And so you have to affirm it, and you have to get as much quality information as you can. I was a little alarmed because I looked up fact on Google the other day, and this is what I got. And this was the first hit. You can see at the bottom, it says a piece of information in a report or news article. And I just felt like, well, the whole definition isn't great. A thing that is indisputably the case and used in discussing significance of something that is the case. It's really kind of not helpful, and I figured maybe we all need to review what a fact is. Definitely not everything you read in the news. So this is Karl Popper, and once in a while I go to a scientist, and I'm not sure if you do this as well, but occasionally I'll look at scientific thought when it comes to facts, and Karl Popper said generally as a rule, a fact is something you should potentially be able to falsify. So if the sky's blue and I do some research and it turns out it's orange, I can potentially falsify that the sky is blue. He said you cannot have these absolute beliefs that cannot be challenged and call that a fact. So it has to be potentially falsifiable, or else it's not one. So this stems from Stephen Jay Gould, who is also a scientist and talks a lot about data. He really makes a distinction between facts, the data that underlie conclusions, and then what the stories are we draw from those facts, or what those theories are that we draw from those facts. And he thinks it's really important, and I do too, that facts are sort of the bedrock, and then a story overlays it, and the story can change. Sometimes new facts come up. You know, as he said, facts do not go away just because there's debate over the rival theories or stories explaining them. It doesn't necessarily mean the facts have changed. It may just mean we've interpreted them differently. A lot of times, the stories and the facts seem to be getting confused. I think people should be much more careful about changing an established fact, even if the story has changed. And right now, we're dealing in this country with established facts but different stories emanating from them. But I think we still need to remember there is objective reality, and that we may have different narratives that come from the data, but that doesn't necessarily change the data day to day. A few other things he said. Debates on fundamental issues are a sign of intellectual health. We should be able to debate things with the data we're given. That's fine. We should always be open to doing that. A friend of mine from Cuba said at a cocktail party recently that he felt like political discussion in our country was a problem, and that people would shut down, they wouldn't want to talk, because we were afraid of being criticized. And he said, don't do that. I can tell you in Cuba it did not work for us. So we should all be happy to have debates. And we should all be happy to talk about what we think are facts and why. Old information may be explained in new ways, and just trying to falsify a theory or a story, it's just not enough. You have to have a better alternative story. And if you don't, just saying no, that's not really helpful. We need to find the narratives based on fact that are the closest to reality that we can get, and that's what journalists are supposed to be doing. This is just me, and I highly doubt any journalist has thought about this, but my dream journalist is this woman from Stranger in a Strange Land, and I don't know how many of you were reading horrible science fiction in the 70s and 60s, but it comes from this book by Robert Heinlein. In it, he has someone he calls a fair witness, and her name is Anne. And he asks her, she's jumping on a trampoline. It's not in this. But she's jumping on a trampoline, and he says, as if to prove what a fair witness is, he says, what color is the house on that hillside? And she said, it's white on this side, which is her way of saying, I don't really know what the other sides are. That's my dream journalist. And at the end, he says, all the king's horses couldn't force her to commit herself unless she went there and looked, and even then she wouldn't assume that it stayed white after she left. Ideally, that's what journalists are doing. But honestly, when I read a story, I don't say the house was white on one side, and we're not encouraged to do that in the newsroom, but ideally, that's really how we should be looking at everything. Just a couple more things. The Hippocratic oath for us as journalists is to never knowingly write something we think is not verifiable facts. And we do lots of interviews to double check things like that. We should always be looking to contextualize the quality of our information. If we're not sure something's true, we should say, you know, people who we interviewed and name who they are believe something to be the case, but we should not be saying something is a fact unless we really have verified it. We have to be open to all new evidence, and some of us are better at that than others, and we've all made mistakes in that area. We have to correct ourselves when we're certain that what we thought before was wrong. And if we do question new facts and we are skeptical of them, we have to explain to our readers why we think these new facts aren't right. If we're not doing that, again, we're not doing our jobs, and we do have to be accountable. I don't know how many people here have had to talk to a journalist. Anybody? Ever? Interviewed? Okay, a number of people. Did you feel you were misquoted? Hands? Wow. Did you feel that they insulted you? Okay, so the misquotedness was mainly careless, it looks like. How many of you talked to the journalist afterward? You did? You did. Less of you. And a lot of people don't. So if you don't tell the journalist, if you sandbag me, and here's why, and I need you to fix it, then they won't even know. And I urge you to always talk to a journalist, because that is the deepest shame for them, getting things wrong. You do have power to address it, and you should always have them email you your quotes when you do an interview, by the way. Yeah, I see her nodding. So we're supposed to serve the reader in our work, not ourselves. This isn't supposed to be about our egos. We are ego-driven. That's why we have bylines. But it's supposed to be ego-driven for accuracy and great storytelling. It's not supposed to be ego-driven in a way that does not serve our reader. Final word on this. So more from Stephen Jay Gould. He said, in science, fact means confirmed to such a degree that it would be perverse to withhold provisional assent. Just meaning when you have a lot of available quality information pointing to something, it is okay to start to assume it's a fact. You can always change your mind. A lot of times things can change with new facts. And this happens all the time. Journalists are always writing first drafts, second drafts, and having to change the story. There's so many things right now we don't know in our country that we're trying to figure out about our elections, about our administration, and also about other groups in this country and how they're interacting with them. And we don't always have all the information. We have incomplete sets of facts. And journalists are almost always without every answer. So we're trying to write our best based on what we have, and then it's our job to keep revising it. Okay, So onto the book. The reason why I'm tying in journalism with the book right now is because I've found that things are much harder to report on if they're radioactive, if emotions are running high around the subject, if there's a lot of money involved around the subject, if people might be embarrassed because of something you wrote. And those all kind of come together to make something radioactive. I love writing about radioactive topics, but I know every single time I'm going to have a lot of people who are very angry. And in the introduction, the words said were very kind. When I wrote about Bitcoin, there was a huge number of people who thought I got it completely wrong, and I got a lot of feedback, and a lot of it pretty negative, which I'll walk you through as part of this. Some of the funner things I'm going to share with you today are some of the behind-the-scenes things that took place in my career. I just wanted to read a little bit from the Asylum, just to introduce you to the oil traders. And I spent the first 15 years or so covering Wall Street, living in New York. I was a small town girl from Norwell, Massachusetts, a lifelong New Englander, and I'd never met people like this before. And I was, I was writing for the Wall Street Journal, and one day I had lunch with one of the former oil market chairmen, and he said, "I'm so glad you're the one covering this for the Journal, because that other guy, Adam Smith," that wasn't his name, but that other guy, he always mentioned how we had his potato default in 1976. And I said, "What? Potatoes?" And he said, "Oh yeah, it was so embarrassing. You know, we traded Maine potatoes, and then the Idaho potato traders tried to square off against us, and we lost. We lost, they won, and now potato trading is banned throughout the land forevermore." Now, I didn't know that. I thought this was just an oil market. I guess onions cannot be traded. It's illegal because they also were so corrupt about how they traded them. Potatoes, and there's a lot of other silver coins when they started to phase out dimes for silver in our currency markets. The traders started trading silver coins furiously and melting them down in smelters and delivering them against the silver contract. Loved it. One guy still does it. He calls me from Florida, and he's like, "I love the black market coin trade." So I want to read a little bit about these guys, just kind of an example from a couple of them, what they were like. What's that? Tulips. They never traded tulips, but one guy told me he could make a market in broken dishes. And I think he meant it. So this is just a quick intro into the traders. And this market is based in Battery Park City in downtown New York. It's called the New York Mercantile Exchange. And it's where we get all of our prices for gasoline, for propane, for natural gas, heating our homes, driving our cars. They are global prices. The world often follows the prices on this exchange, and this exchange still exists to this day. So here it is. By default, the oil traders wielded incalculable influence over the global markets, but they were by no means counted among its elite. They welcomed their outsider status. They didn't care about being accepted. They liked being untouchables. Wearing a suit was considered emblematic of answering to somebody other than oneself. Social climbing was for suits and suckers. Sneakers, preferably untied. Sweatshirts, preferably flapping outside the pants. And any other indicators of answering only to oneself were deemed important essentials of their far superior uniform. After all, they didn't need to dress up. Voluntary inconspicuousness was the luxury, true luxury of wealth. The oil traders' one sartorial concession was to wear brightly colored trading jackets because it made it easier to see each other while screaming orders at each other in the trading pits. Otherwise, they dressed down, not just to disguise their riches, but to renounce Wall Street in general. They didn't look rich, they didn't act rich, they didn't talk rich. And that's what made it all the more satisfying when they beat a highfalutin Goldman Sachs trader at his own game 1 minute before the market closed on a Friday. Wow. If the world ignored them, so be it. It only gave them a welcome excuse to ignore the world back. A little bit more. One of the youngest oil traders I met, his father made millions during the first Gulf War, and he came down during the trading into the trading pits for the second Gulf Coast War. This was right around the time we did the second war in Iraq, right after September 11th. His name was Ben Kaufman, and he would always give me exactly what was going on in the trading pits. He had absolutely no compunction about it. Ben Kaufman's preparation for the trading day wasn't complicated. Some traders got up at 5 a.m. and obsessively went over their price charts. They would look over the oil price highs and lows from the day before and check for any market trends, circling the numbers with colored markers. But most people, he says, came in cold and went by instinct alone. You can't predict the market, so a lot of us didn't try, he said. You just get used to it. After a while, you get to feeling like it's in your blood, that everything it does is attached to you in some way, and that you're a part of it, that you have a biological connection. I know how that sounds, but it's true. My ritual was to wake up around 8:30, go to the corner coffee shop, and get a really big cup of coffee. I pour half of it out and then replace it with some Jack Daniels, in case anybody's keeping up with the bath. I'd save the rest of the bottle of Jack for later. I put the top back on the coffee and get to work by 9:30. Most of the time, I'd be there before anybody else. I put my stuff in my locker, change into a trading jacket, pick up my trading sheets for the day, get my second cup of coffee, very important, and head into the pits. Nobody cared if I was drunk. As long as I got the job done, they didn't give a flying, and this is a family-friendly event. Although the trading day it was hard to find passages, by the way, that were family-friendly. Although the trading day was just 4.5 hours long, many of the traders had difficulty doing their jobs while staying sober. The amount of money at stake in this market is so great, it's hard for people not to use something to take the edge off, Ben said. Being on the floor is the adrenaline surge of your life. One of the requirements of the job that nobody ever tells you is that you have to love chaos and be truly, truly out of your mind. The days that I hated my job were the days that were quiet. The days that I loved my job were the days I couldn't get off the phone. When prices are high and the market is moving, you get happy. If my customers were making money, I was on top of the world. Sometimes I would even skip my jab. It was like a drug. You get this incredible high during the day and pass out the second your head hit the pillow at night. It's the greatest job in the world, but you can't stay in it forever or it starts to kill you. So a lot of the passages in this book are like that, are stories about individuals in this market and how the more powerful of the individuals end up converging to try to take control of this market, and then what happens to them. A lot of them have died just in the last few years, and it's a very stressful life being a trader. It can make you angry when you read some of these passages, when you hear about how greedy some of them are, but I think you'll also see that a lot of them suffered greatly in the work they were doing. It was a 10 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. market, and yet these people look like they were at the end of their lives a lot of the time at a very young age. I hope you get to read some more of this. I'm going to move on to some of the other stories that I've done where I think radioactive journalism became sort of a theme, not something I ever expected. My background was on Wall Street. It's a very conservative environment. And as I got more curious about different complicated environments, just like this one, the oil traders, I got more interested in how does corruption happen. People don't get together and say, let's be corrupt. What usually happens is it's an organic process of people working together over time for personal gain, and they find themselves doing things they never imagined. And so as I got further into looking at cultures of corruption, I started to look at lots of things. The next piece I'm going to show you is Bitcoin. This was a story I did in 2014, and I was curious. That was it. I wasn't trading Bitcoin. I just wondered how somebody said, let's make computer code into money and then get a lot of people to buy it with cash. And I needed to know, I just had to know how that happened. So I wrote this story. I eventually was led through a number of different trails, both electronic and through reporting, just shoe leather reporting and doing interviews, led to a man out in California. And to this day, I think a lot of people are very unsure if he had anything to do with the origins of Bitcoin, but based on my research, I am quite certain he did. What I want to emphasize is the journey of the journalists when they write about something radioactive. There was a lot of money involved in this. The Bitcoin market was moving toward its highs at the time. If any of you are curious about Bitcoin, it just had a market crash this year. Great time to invest. You wouldn't have wanted to do it last year, but this year is good. Not an advertisement, by the way. So I published this story. I don't think anyone had done a serious piece yet, especially a cover story, on who was behind Bitcoin. There had been theories. Journalists had written about theories. So I published it. Forbes came out almost immediately after with this headline, the outing of the Bitcoin creator, Satoshi Nakamoto, who is supposedly the anonymous creator. A lot of people don't think that is his name. She wrote, "It's important journalism." This woman called me repeatedly. She was under a great deal of stress for calling it important journalism because people were angry with her. A lot of people feel that because Satoshi Nakamoto has been largely anonymous, that you shouldn't ever try to talk about who's behind Bitcoin. So some people will be angry no matter what you say, as long as you're trying to write about the origins. She wrote this lovely story. Meanwhile, back in the newsroom, here are the internal emails. We should file a police report, Leah. People were dumping information about me online. I had just moved into a new home in Brattleboro, Vermont. And it was new, so it wasn't on Google Earth. You could Google the address. You couldn't find the house. People started posting my neighbors' houses online saying, "Let's get her." I had just moved into the neighborhood that I was completely embarrassed. So it talks about filing a police report. Stay safe, that's the lawyer for Newsweek. I said, my heart was in my throat when I saw how close they are to hacking everything. I'm thinking my bank accounts, my family, I'm thinking about everybody I care about. To call my ex-husband in California and his wife, told them to go on lockdown. I quickly ran back to Brattleboro and I met all my neighbors for the first time, telling them their houses were on the internet, that I'm a journalist and I'm very sorry I'm their neighbor. Kira, who is my deputy managing editor, was trying to keep things light and said, "Leah, making a fun list of all the stuff you've been called on Twitter. Last night I got witch hunting." I'm not going to say what she wrote there, you can read it. And I said, "That's amazing." And I accidentally CC'd our CEO, who then had to read that. It was scary, and a lot of our information ended up online, our editor-in-chief, and we had people trying to hack into our email accounts all day long for days, and people threatening our lives. So here we get to the external reactions. People creating memes about me. I had, which I'm afraid was a mistake, made a comment on Facebook to friends on a private feed saying, "I'm sure that the Bitcoiners will all understand this better when they hit puberty." Or that they'll see it in a different light when they hit puberty. And it was a joke. So somebody made that in response. Then everyone gets a Keanu meme. I feel like everyone, you're not gonna get a meme without Keanu involved at some point. Okay, that's all I'm gonna say about Bitcoin. I'm actually working on a 5-year anniversary story of Bitcoin, but I'm gonna save my ammunition. So the radioactive work I'm most focused on right now is this story of this children's home in Jersey. It's an island off the coast of France. It is complicated. The British Queen effectively owns it as part of her landed property. She has for about 1,000 years. And so it is a parliamentary democracy under a constitutional monarchy, which basically means she's in charge, but they pretend to be a democracy. This is a children's home where substantial amounts of crimes happened with children and came to light in 2008. I'm going to get to a little bit more of that soon. This is an aerial view of Jersey. It's the largest of the 5 Channel Islands. Very beautiful, very wealthy. And it's what is called a peculiar possession of the British Crown. It is There you can see it's very close to France. London is, let me see if I can use this. London's right there. It's about 25-minute puddle jump flight. They give you your tea, start to drink it, they take it away after 2 sips, and you're there. I got used to going there when I lived in London as a getaway, really to get away from stress. This was not supposed to be anything other than a beautiful vacation island with great food. And because Jersey used to be a part of France, all of the names on the island of streets and buildings are all French. And they still speak an old dialect of French Norman called Jarret. And this Jersey is the old Jersey to New Jersey. One of their wealthy families, the de Carteret family, helped found and owned many of the lands of New Jersey in the US. So there is a relationship. Jersey is also a massive tax shelter. It has an estimated $2 trillion of wealth that is hoarded mostly off of England, Europe, and the Middle East. This is St. Helier, their capital city. There's an A to Z list of banks in this city. Every bank you've heard of has an office here, and a lot of hedge funds. They really care about their reputation in all the ways you can imagine, and because they're such a small island, they're very, very hawkish about protecting themselves and their good name. So as you can imagine, when the Jersey police, a Scottish man and another British man, got together and decided we have to get to the bottom of all the rumors about this children's home. This home had closed in the mid-'80s. There was about 150 years worth of crimes to look at. They started to dig after a top secret investigation. They kept it secret because they knew the islanders would not be happy about looking at this. The school had been the subject. It was a boys' home and a school in Victorian times, and then had girls and boys all the way through the mid-'80s. These police officers got together, decided to get to the bottom of it. This was the basement area where most of the people who were still alive talked about terrible things happening. And I won't go into the details, but we're talking almost like war crime level behavior. They were not just they were not doing things that we read about in newspapers. They were really, really hurting these children, breaking up brothers and sisters. Some of the stories I heard, and it's hard to not cry while you're doing interviews, really torturing them mentally, not just physically. And this is where a lot of the remains were found of children, mostly teeth and bones. This is a dig continuing into 2009. At this point, I'm writing the asylum, I'm in New York. I love this island, and I'm watching this all happen, and I'm horrified. This is what got my attention. Up until this moment, I was simply thinking this was a terrible tragedy. But then a pathologist found what they identified as a piece of child's skull, and the authorities on the island found themselves fighting with everyone else in the banking industry as well as the political side of the island over what was this. And in the end, it came down to it's maybe a skull, maybe it's a coconut, maybe it's wood. We don't even know where this fragment is anymore, but it's called jar 6. It was the 6th jar of remains that they had gathered. And it was when the pathologist said that it was definitely a child's skull, and then the island insisted it wasn't, that I thought, wow, they don't even want to do like the basic things police do anymore. They actually then started to attack the police officers doing the investigation and any politician who tried to stick up for them. This is the back of the children's home. It's a sheer drop to the ocean. This is sort of what it looks like if you're facing out back. There are wide open fields all around. And for the children who were in this home, they really didn't have anywhere to go. They did run away, but there wasn't really anywhere for them to not get caught because it was such a wide open place, and unless you swim to France, you're not going to get away. This is one of the old Nazi war tunnels on the island. The Nazis did occupy Jersey during the war, and they used Hot Delegaron as a signal station. But even then, no one was able to swim to France in the history of that occupation. So I started investigating. I started traveling to the island strictly to look at what was going on. I was really concerned about these statues I found, which are not cherubs and they're not art. These were life-sized children without clothes on, and they were on gates of very wealthy people's homes in the immediate vicinity around Haute de la Garenne, the children's home. I found them shocking, and that's why I photographed them. Jersey has a lot of weird statuary. It's a very ancient island. It was invaded by the Vikings. It had a very strong Druid presence. It was part of the land bridge between Europe and what is now England. And it has this very ancient kind of history of Stonehenge-like formation, some of the oldest in the world. These are some of the Neolithic formations on the island. They have a history of witches, Satan worship, and a lot of stuff that doesn't really sound normal to maybe an American in what is really a new country for us. But it's about as old as a place can get. When you're there, you can feel it. There's a lot of old stories. It also has a history of child abusers on the island. This was one of the most notorious, called the Beast of Jersey. And when you go to gift shops on the island, you can get a book about the Beast of Jersey in the same way you can get a book on Jack the Ripper when you're in England. This man terrorized the island for over a decade, was never apprehended. He was also an honorary police officer, and it was part of the reason they never caught him. Eventually, they got him in 1971, and he did go to jail. The Queen, as I said, is in charge of this island. She's aware of the problems, she just kind of never really does anything about it. And I haven't been able to interview her, but I would ask her why. This is her chief guy who kind of oversees things. The island does have elected politicians, but the key people on the island are appointed by her, and they just, almost like a judge, they just get to be in that position forever. So the politicians that did try to speak out and to guard against meddling in the investigation into the children's home, I think out of all of them, the one my heart went out to the most was Stewart. He was the most popular politician on the islands. He was a senator, the health minister, and he just said we need to get to the bottom of this, and he felt very strongly about it. The day he told the parliament on the island, I cannot guarantee the safety of children on this island anymore, they voted him out. He is still fighting, but he is not in a good position now. He doesn't have a job. He's really, in many ways, just living on his pension. Lenny Harper was the chief investigator of the dig. He was the Scottish guy who came in. Islanders generally said, hey, he's from Scotland, he doesn't understand who we are, he's trying to get involved in things he shouldn't. The local newspaper, which is government-owned, which makes it feel a little bit like being in China, where the media is controlled by the government, it tends to only report on things that are sanctioned by the government. And so when they started reporting on Haute de la Garenne, they would attack Lenny and smear him. His family was threatened. And eventually he left in 2009. He had worked in Ireland during a lot of the bombings, and he said that the island was more stressful for his family than it was dealing with Irish bombings. Graham Power was his boss, the top cop on the island. He hung in there. The island repeatedly, the Council of Ministers and authorities of the island repeatedly sought to suspend him. They said he was spending too much money on the dig. They found anything they could. Jersey is interesting in that when they try to go against the grain or challenge something, they don't just do it one time. They'll double up 3 or 4 times and do like a 3-ply attack. So I think technically he was suspended 3 times in just a few months, because if one fell through, they wanted to make sure one would stick. And one eventually did, and he had to leave the island. He does not want to go back. He's like Lenny, he doesn't think it's safe. Of course, I thought it was safe. I was told by a number of my friends who were traders and bankers from Wall Street who had settled on the island. They said, don't do this. They'll take your passport away. They'll take your, they'll drive you out of here like they have the others. I said, what are they going to do? Take my pen, keep me from writing? And but they kind of tried to do that. This is my detainment slip. I was traveling to the island from Heathrow Airport in 2011. They came to me, they said, "Could we ask you some questions?" I said, "Sure." They locked me up, and they didn't have any questions. They took my luggage and started digging through it. There were no questions. This was my slip. This is me in the detention room. It's a fisheye lens, you can tell it's a camera. I was held for 12 hours, which is the legal limit. I didn't know since I was in this room. I had no phone, no ID, they take everything. Can't call your family. You're off the earth for 12 hours. They did not tell me how long I would be locked up, so they allowed me to believe it could be days or longer. So I was just sitting there. And it took 5 years to get the footage. It was a member of parliament who had to make sure I got the footage. They kept telling me it had been destroyed, that they didn't have it, but I did eventually get it. If you are banned from a country, and that country is England, this is what it looks like, that sort of the black stamp of death. I still get questions about it on my passport when I go through different countries. Why were you banned from England? It's always very awkward. But this was at Heathrow on September 11th, so it also wasn't a great day to be getting a stamp like that. So I came back to the US. One of the politicians on the island, Trevor Pittman, that's him, he started a change.org petition. The goal was mainly to embarrass the authorities for being so afraid of a journalist. And it worked. We got a lot of signatures. I wouldn't have thought a petition would have helped so much. It probably was one of the main things that helped. I learned that if you can't appeal to people's reason or morality, you can embarrass them. And that was what this did. At a certain point, this was an appeal to Michael Robinson. I got a call from Michael Robinson's assistant, and they said, "Please tell people to stop sending us emails. We're overwhelmed. And we can't do anything anyway." So we persisted. These are my belongings, which I didn't get for months, that were sent back to me from the island. They had been unpacked and repacked over and over again. And the UPS guy who showed up in Brattleboro dumped them on my step and ran. I was actually in my kitchen and I saw what he did. And I don't know what he thought, but I did call the UPS asking what had happened. And they said, "We don't know." They were sent to Germany, then they were sent to Kentucky, and we can't tell you why. I did call a friend at Homeland Security, and he said, "You're a person of interest, obviously, but they're not going to ever tell you that." So at this point, we also did interviews. I did interviews with a number of different publications talking about what happened. This is a Q&A with Vice. The Guardian did a number of pieces, as did the BBC, and most of them really hit the mark, really helped raise awareness, and got us a lot more support. A member of parliament passed an early day motion saying that I had been banned, I was trying to investigate a cover-up of child abuse, and that this was not what England stood for. And that helped as well, because we could publicize that too. So finally I got my UK visa restored, and this is it. Probably the main person who helped me here was John Hemming. He is a member of parliament for a very long time. He's only recently gone back into business, into private life. He had and has repeatedly helped me get data on things in the UK as well as on the island of Jersey that I couldn't have gotten any other way in reporting on child abuse. I am sad to say that John Hemming has now been accused of being a child abuser, and I'm not sure what to say about that, because you really, unless you know the survivors and victims who are making the accusations, you can't know. But I do know that his behavior was not consistent with someone who, in every way, he wanted this to be investigated, and he wanted it investigated in England and on the island, and to this day feels that way. I think probably people were trying to attack him because of what he's trying to do, his advocacy. That is what my gut says, and I still talk to John Hemming. He's fighting very hard. He's already been told he's no longer under suspicion. But of course, reputationally, it's devastating to be accused, and that was the point. That was the point of attacking him. So here I am, I'm going back to Jersey. This is one of the trolls saying, after a year of being banned, for movements against the states of Jersey, Leah McGrath Goodman has returned to free us from the abuse and suffering we've endured since before the war. It's interesting to mention the war because it's a normal way to talk in Jersey, to talk about enemies of the island. It's kind of a throwback from the war, but they still say it like there's enemies now. And usually you have to remind them that there's no longer Nazis on the island and that they're okay and it's going to be okay. There's no enemies anymore trying to attack them, but there is an attitude of us against them. This might be the closest thing to a death threat maybe that has happened. This person wrote, "I just found a hotel for Leah when she comes over." I don't know if you all know what a wicker man is. You put the person in and you set it on fire. So I think the idea was to scare me. And I know that there's a movie called Wicker Man, and I will not watch it until I'm done with this project. So at this point, I'm traveling with other journalists whenever I go to the island. And I want to emphasize that in addition to embarrassing people in power when they won't do the right thing, the other thing you can do is you can team up with allies who will help you get your story written, help you with information, and also these people all wanted to do their own research. So we traveled at the same time, and it was a way to make sure that no matter what, if anything happened to any one of us, we would all be documenting it. I strongly advise it for anyone who ever does anything tricky. It's not just for kids, adults should also buddy up. These are activists on the island. They were and have been completely invaluable to me. They're best friends, they are fathers, and they've been blogging about the abuse and crimes that have flourished against children on the island for years. And they're very brave people. Hopefully I'm going to be able to show you a little bit of a film with them in it, which is going to be part of a documentary we're doing about the islands. So just moving along, sign outside of Hot de la Guerra. After the investigation was shut down into the children's home, this construction company came in and filled the basement in with cement. You cannot get into the basement anymore, there is no more basement. I found it very frightening that they would go ahead and do that so openly, but they did. I wrote a cover story for Newsweek on the island, both its wealth as well as its reputational issues with abuse. And then in 2013, Jersey's parliament decided finally to do a public inquiry. This was shortly after the Newsweek story. But remember, the activists on the island also were always working to try to get an inquiry afloat. Finally, the parliament agreed. Again, had to be embarrassed into agreeing. And at this point, hundreds of victims testified. They also took a lot of the testimony from the original police investigation. Bless you. And a lot of them talked about being taken on boats, taken into international waters, and abused. One of the highest level people accused is Ted Heath, former Prime Minister of England. He loved Jersey. He spent so much time in Jersey that at the end of his life, the head of police told me they needed a contingency plan for what happens if a Prime Minister dies on the island. What do we do? But he liked taking his yacht. He also liked taking the children from the children's home on his yacht. And there are numerous accounts of people who said that a certain amount of children would go out on the boat and not the same number would come back. At this time, during the investigation, the statues came down. They were all taken down before the judge came to the island to investigate child abuse. And I thought that was very telling. Here's the judge. She's a UK judge. The first judge appointed had a stroke and died while she started the work. That has not been unusual in my experience. A lot of people looking at this stuff have had health issues. This judge totally made it through to the end. I have to commend her because a lot of people didn't. And it was a 3-year inquiry, and in the end she said that a lot of these stories were indeed true and that children may still be at risk. The judge ordered the children's home torn down. In 2017, exactly a year ago, in July, she announced her findings. But they decided they want to use it as a youth hostel. I don't know why on earth they would think that would be a good use for it. They certainly have people on the island who could use it for lodging, adults. There does seem to be a fixation on having children in this building, and it's very disturbing. Liz McCain, she had exposed a number of the abusers from England who had come to the island, including a high-level star at the BBC where she worked, named Jimmy Savile. He was a really, he may not be recognizable to all of you, but he was also very good friends with Ted Heath. They liked to go to Jersey together. It is now not in question that Jimmy Savile abused, it sounds like over 100 children. Liz McKean worked also in the child abuse inquiry. She had a stroke exactly a year ago in August and passed away. She was this young. She was a wonderful colleague, somebody I really respected, and I was shocked that she died. So the Jersey Chief Minister, once the inquiry results were announced last year, he apologized. I think he really meant it. He seems like a good guy. He tried really hard to see this through under a great deal of pressure. And he pledged to clean up the island. He was voted out pretty much immediately, within just a few months. And now a member of the old guard has been put in, who certainly doesn't have any intention of doing anything. This is Stuart Seabray, the health minister who campaigned for children. This is Stuart today. He has kind of lost everything. And when I think about whether or not journalism is necessary, I hope I can say yes, because when I look at what has happened on this island, when a legal system fails and the political system fails and pretty much everything else gets hushed up, journalists are sometimes the only people stubborn enough to keep asking questions. This is a journalist actually talking to him. This project was undertaken in 2010, so I passed in that book. I wrote that book in 9 months. I thought this book would be just a few months. I thought I'll go to the island, I'll research this children's home, it's a tiny island, how hard could this be? Instead, it's been one of the hardest, most expensive, laborious projects I've ever undertaken. And I'm hoping that I'm going to finish the writing this year, but because it is difficult work, you do have to take breaks, and part of moving to Vermont has been to be in a beautiful place with wonderful people and to continue this work. So thank you very much for coming out tonight. Thank you for supporting the Dover Free Library. Happy to take questions. Yes. Yes?
Two questions, but they're somewhat mixed.
Okay.
How do you define journalists now, with photojournalists, video journalists, etc.? And the other thing is, how do you define the audience? Because you continually refer to readers, and we know how people read, and read with any insight these days. So how are you guys wrestling with this stuff? And how is it being done to train people?
Yeah, reading obviously getting increasingly less popular depending on where you live or what circles you move among. I mean, I know a lot of millennials who love reading, so I'm still very hopeful. And I have noticed they are much better at filtering information almost instinctively because they've been online since they could remember. So I have hope for the future that they will be able to lead the way as savvy readers. I know that my intern from the School of International Training had a very good you-know-what detector. Almost instinctively knew, even if you gave her an article from a very biased news source, she could tell exactly what was going on pretty easily. So I'm hoping that continues to be the case with millennials, and that we continue to teach our children to be savvy readers. And as far as journalism, I think anyone who wants to get as close as possible to objective truth without an agenda, just truth first, then we'll figure out the rest, is a journalist in my mind. The activists on the island to me are journalists because they care only about what the data is showing, what the facts are showing, and they are tireless in trying to get the most possible quality information. So if you're a photojournalist and you're doing that, if you're a writer, if you're a blogger, I'm definitely looking at you as someone in league with journalists, if not a journalist. Does that answer?
Who are these children in this home, and where do they come from, and how did they get placed there?
So a lot of the children in this home were immigrant children. So the island did have other homes for local children. this home in particular was for immigrant children, and I think that was why, unfortunately, there was kind of a focus. A lot of them were brought in from other countries, some of them also from England. And in addition, children from homes that were difficult environments for whatever reason, or maybe there were too many children, they would actually send some of their kids to the home. And so it became known, unfortunately, among children on the island as the home for bad children. But really it was rambunctious children or difficult children plus immigrant children. And they were kind of seen as, sadly, like a lower tier by a lot of the people on the island who are very wealthy. And there were children going here all the way up through the mid-'80s. I don't know why, but the BBC actually filmed a show called Bergerac, which was a popular kind of dragnet-style television show at the children's home, which they don't like to talk about, but BBC stars were coming and going at the children's home, and there were trailers and actors coming and going, and there's a lot of stuff still online about that, although they've tried to take a lot of it down. There were too many people coming and going, for sure, at that home.
How many survivors of the homes are still alive?
Yeah, so witnesses and survivors, there have been, I think, about 250 that came forward from all over the world. Some of them are still on the island, a lot of them have left. And most of them are still alive. Of course, the ones that aren't, we don't know about. But they also reported so many different abusers that the number of abusers that were named were almost as many as those who were survivors, which is amazing that many people have been accused. Yes?
Was this run by a religious order?
In the early days, in the Victorian times of the boys' home, in the late 1800s, there were nuns, but I haven't seen any strong links between religion and what went on. It looks like it had to do more with people who were just predatory and not necessarily related to religion. It's a good question, though. Yes?
Particularly in more recent times, has the abuse there been a matter of entertainment for the employees, or has there been some monetary thing when people come in and pay money for taking a kid out in the boat or something?
Yeah, so Ted Heath, the British Prime Minister, who loved this island, he actually was instrumental in the island being set aside from the EU when the EU was being formed, specifically to create a carve-out tax shelter that wouldn't fall under EU rules. The island was very indebted to him for that. It hugely enriched them. Up until then, they've been mainly a farming culture. You've heard of Jersey cream, Jersey cows, Jersey potatoes. So this idea of powerful people doing business on the island or currying favor on the island and then really being allowed to kind of do what they wanted in certain ways. Yes, they did. There were a lot of survivors who told stories about very wealthy businessmen type people being brought in the evenings with alcohol, and as though this was a lending library for children. Yeah, you look like you're not surprised.
What's
Yeah.
the population of Jersey?
It's about 100,000 people.
Yeah,
Yes,
very small.
it's very small.
There'll be a lot of awareness there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, so we're in small towns here in Vermont. Imagine if something that had always been part of the history, but you really didn't want to know. A lot of the islanders feel like that. They've all heard the stories. A lot of them are parents. A close friend of mine, she was in one of the photos at the end, Rebecca, she said, Leah, it's so awful. And she's a mom. She said, I just don't want to know about it. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to think about it. And I think a lot of them have that attitude of this is unpleasant. Let's talk about something else. So there's awareness, but there's also a feeling of I don't want to know, and I'd rather not know amongst many of the islanders. It's not that they don't care. I think it's painful because it's so close. Yes.
Your story kind of reminds me of the movie Jaws.
Really?
Well, there's a shark in the water, but the locals don't want to believe it.
Wow. That is an interesting Jaws corollary. Maybe multiple sharks in this case, but yeah, there are a couple of major sharks for sure. Anybody else? I'm really, yes?
So in your comments, you talked about corruption. Things don't always start out corrupt, they evolve. And maybe you said it, but I missed it. So this has been around for a long time. Is there a story about the creep of corruption and when this began? It probably didn't start out that way, as I would suspect, but is there a story there too?
Yeah, so there is, and this may sound like I'm taking a slightly roundabout route, but one of the reasons why there's been such a debate about whether or not we should have places for children in our immigration debate right now in this country is that the U.S. a while back decided having a large place to put children in never works out. That it's just bad for the kids, which is why our system is mainly about fostering. Of course, there's no way to child protect everything, but they have found when you have a large institutional home, put a lot of kids in it, it seems to attract the wrong kinds of people. Even though I did hear from many of the survivors that there was a woman in the home or a man in the home who would try to help or try to look out for them or try to hide them when something was going to go down. There were stories like that, but it seemed like predominantly over time, these homes became magnets for the wrong kinds of people. And you're right, in the beginning, it wasn't that way, but it was the creep that you're talking about was more people found out about these children and how helpless they were, the more the wrong people showed up. Yes?
I recently read in the New Yorker a review, I think it was by Elizabeth Colbert, and she was talking about, and there was a review in the New Yorker, I think it was by Elizabeth Colbert, and she was talking about, in the studies that she was looking at, why people, how people believe what they believe. And one of the studies she mentioned was, this was an experiment, they took some people and they told them that these things had caused this. And then they asked them to say what had caused this, and they said, well, it was these things. Then they came back to them and they said, we lied to you. Those were not the things that caused this. These are the things that caused this, and this is the evidence. These are the real things that caused this. And then they asked them again, now what do you believe? And apparently most of them believed the first thing they were told. And I think that's part of what's going on with the tweeting, that getting people, telling them the first thing is really hard then to get them to change their minds because of facts. And so I'm wondering, in your work and where you are so committed to and dependent upon that, aren't you in a way at a disadvantage because you don't get the first take out there? You have to wait until you've got some verifiability stuff. And if that's really how people work, a lot of us, it makes your facts less effective.
Yeah, so there's a plus and a minus to being kind of the first on the ground while something's happening and no one knows what's going on yet. And when I was in the newsroom, you'll probably know what I'm talking about here. When I was in the newsroom, we had a bank of televisions. It sounds really primitive now, but we had physical box televisions along the news desk, and one would be on Fox, one would be on MSNBC, one would be on CNN, one would be on Fox Business. You know, it was like 10 TVs in a row, and they'd all be going at once. And you got so good at hearing each one separately. Don't know how this happens to people, but you get so good at it while you're also writing. That your ear will pick up on, oh, something's happening on channel. And we noticed, because we had all the channels on all the time, Fox News always was first with everything. So if there was a weird, strange package at LAX, you know, the airport in LA, they'd be like, weird package, nobody knows anything. And the other networks wouldn't say anything because there was no way of knowing if this was a dangerous package or if it was just somebody left a toy somewhere. But what it would do was you'd slowly watch the other networks start to feel like, well, we should say something, even though nobody knows anything. And so you would see the waterfall effect. But what was happening, the downside was you had to always take the Fox channel with a grain of salt because they would flash it immediately. But the upside of that channel was you knew if anything was going on at all, even not suspicious, it would be going on over there. And so if you were wondering if you just missed something, I would check that channel first before all the others. They have a lot of resources, and so they would be on everything, even if it wasn't suspicious. So there's a plus and a minus there, right? You're first on the ground, you're gonna be first on the ground covering non-news. But you also might be first on the ground when news is happening. So it's a double-edged sword, and what you're saying about beliefs being intractable, I worry about this all the time as a journalist. Is my belief system pliant enough? Am I versatile enough? Am I willing to change my mind enough? Can I really weigh the facts and balance the facts and let them point me in the right direction? That's what we're supposed to be doing. It's not supposed to be about what we think we're headed toward. All you should be doing is letting the facts show you where you go. And I've had journalists, I had an interview recently with a Wall Street Journal reporter who said to me, "How do you write stories?" And I said, "Well, I follow the facts and I see where they lead." And he's like, "Yeah, but how?" And I thought, I'm not really sure how to answer that question. I mean, you do your very best and you're hoping that you're doing a good job, and you have to be open to people, hopefully mentors, who will lead you to a better place or help give you superior methods too, because there are superior methods. And I think mid-career journalists have to be trying to take it up a notch and not just get lazy. Yes.
Why have you moved to Brattleboro?
Why did I move here?
Sure.
Wow, I had come up here throughout my 20s when I was on Wall Street and just found it a very nurturing place and had friends here and would come and ski. The skiing was definitely a big plus. And I love the outdoors, and I always knew living in the city, I love the city for ideas and for rejuvenating and connecting with people. But I need the space. I just have to have the outdoors and the expansiveness. And whenever I cross that border, when I'm driving over the border of Vermont from Massachusetts coming back from New York, it's amazing. It's just like happiness washes over me. So I don't know. I feel like it's home. It feels like home. Thank you so much, guys.
All right, now it is time for discussion. All right, so what we're going to ask you to do is, if you are staying for dessert, we have over to where my left is, over this side, we have kind of a vegan and gluten-free table. Nothing is sugar-free, sorry. The water is sugar-free. And we're going to ask that you watch out for Russ from VCTV. So Russ, you might want to watch out because we're going to have a mass movement to the back. There are plates on the ends of the table. Please just form a courteous line. And we have servers who are sanitary and waiting to serve you. So please let us serve you this evening. And thank you so much for coming. Please remember we have a book table right up here. Coffee and tea and water. Good deal this time. Did I get it, good deal?
We don't see you at any time. I don't thought, no, I think not. Sorry.
Two lines.
I know, yeah.
Yes.